My name is Greg Toll. I'm a fourth generation farmer in this area, also a fourth generation toll. My great grandfather came to this area back in about 1873 or 4, and tolls have always been around this area. The house behind me was built by my great grandfather in about 1906. When he first settled in this area in about 1870s to the 1880s, he lived in a bark and mud hut somewhere in this vicinity. I'm not too sure where it was, but obviously he did it pretty tough, although he did have a good water supply close and handy. In those days he also would travel out from Echuca through the week to run the farm, and he also, where he lived in Echuca, he produced 10 children, 2 girls and 8 boys. Well, the 8 brothers and the 2 daughters of George Toll moved here in about the 1906s to the 1908s. They lived here for a fair time. My grandfather, who was Fred Toll, a son of George, he was the only Toll that stayed in the district really farming. Another Toll went to Melbourne. As we all know, the Toll transport's still around today, and basically this is where the people that established that would have lived. Behind me is Cow Swamp. This is a man-made lake, probably built about the 1930s to store water, but it was also had benefits for young children, a terrific place to swim. My childhood memories are magnificent. I know our parents used to come out here socially and with all the tolls in the area and meet in another spot not far from here. We called it Dyes area. Out here with my cousins at Long Cow Swamp, if we weren't playing Monopoly, we were out helping my uncle shearing sheep and clipping dags in those days, because they did have quite a few sheep, and the dags needed clipping. But after we'd finished doing that in the morning or afternoon, we would go and play Monopoly, and when it got very, very hot, we'd jump on our bikes or else our horses and ride down to our swimming area not far from this area. I was always very keen on my sport. I was involved in Australian rules football, in cricket and basketball. In those days I was lucky enough to meet my loving wife Marg, and we got married and we had 2 children, a son and a daughter. It must have been a magnificent place to think that the Aboriginal people could come here and get ducks and fish and also any other wildlife they were looking for. 8,000 acres of swamp behind me, and it would have been a very prolific food area for the Indigenous people in those days. The thing I am passionate about, I always said I want to leave the country where I live in far better condition than what I virtually received it at. So that meant we have done a lot of tree planting on our place. We've tidied up a lot of our paddocks to make them able to run stock and to crop pretty well. So it is very important that I leave our farm in far better condition than I found it for future generations.
I am Claire Dickinson. I was a McGuinness. My grandfather was a pioneer, selected his own block here. I have lived here all my life. I am one of 7 children, and my father was a butter maker here at the Gumbau Butter Factory. The original factory was built in 1907, a wooden factory, and it was burnt down in 1922. And this one today was built and was in production by 1924. All the butter that was made here would go by truck to the railway station to Melbourne. And I had 5 aunties in Melbourne. They would buy nothing else but Bauer butter. When I was a child, before I went to school, I used to come over to visit Dad, as he was the butter maker, and a cousin was a tester and grader, and friends were the office girls, so it was like a playground to me. When I first came here, 4, I used to walk around to get the butter. Well, I'd come through the doors and Dad was always on the right doing his bookwork, whatever he put in the churns for the butter, and it very noisy and very wet and beautiful red shiny tiles, and of course everybody was walking around all in white, and the office girls would yell from the top up here, and the boys down there in the laboratory would be yelling. Everybody'd be yelling, you know, because the churns made so much noise. And here at the factory, everybody used to come and get their batteries charged for their wireless because nobody had electricity. In town we had electricity till 12 o'clock on the dot, and the factory would shut the boilers down. No power. We're outside at the factory now, and on my left is the boiler which made the steam for the factory and the power for the town and the factory, and in front of me are the water tanks which supplied the town and the factory for water, and behind me is the ice making which the farms relied on because they had no power, so the whole town relied on the factory. I was born in Kahuna Hospital and I was reared in Gunbower. I went to the primary school and then to the Kahuna High School, and my last year of schooling was at Echuca Tech, as my mother sent me there to learn the finer points of needlework and cooking. After school we'd all have our jobs. Somebody's got to feed the chooks and the ducks, and when we're on the farm, the calves, and then we'd have our tea, and of course not much of lighting, so we'd have a little read to do our homework and then bed. To me, without farming in this district, it will be lost because we all rely on the farming for work and the towns, you know, to keep them going.
Hi, I'm Rob Masters. I've lived here in Gunbower for 54 years, which is all of my life, and I'm the fourth generation Masters to live here on the banks of the Murray. The house you see behind me was built by my great-grandfather in 1863. He first came to this site in about 1861 and built a bark hut to start with, and then after he got married he thought he'd better build a decent sort of house for his missus, so he started building this house. He built the first 2 rooms, and then as the family grew he added on to the house as they went, and they ended up with 13 kids here, so the house must have been pretty tight at times. When he passed away, my grandfather took over the site, and him and his wife reared 8 kids here in this old house, and when he died my parents sold their farm at Kahuna and built a new house on site here. They lived in the old place for about 18 months until a new house was set up and ready to go. Well, we've tried to keep the house as the way it was built, and yeah, it's still standing, luckily. It was been a very basic lifestyle. Like, there was no power, and all they had was kerosene lanterns and an ice to keep their food cool. And like, they had dirt floors. There was nothing, you know. Life itself would have been pretty hard. Like, they made their living from catching fish out of the river, and my grandfather helped work on the Trumbury Lock when it was built in 1923, and my father did it pretty tough when they came up here. He made a living cutting posts, and like, things were never easy, and they did the best with what they could. Our childhood was pretty basic. Me and the brothers, we never had many toys as kids. We had a pair of ferrets and half a dozen mongrel dogs. We spent most of our time out in the bush rabbiting and chasing foxes and doing things that kids today wouldn't even know about. Yeah, we really had a great time as kids. Like, we never started going out into the town much until we were about 16 or 17. There was 8 kids. There was 4 girls and then 4 boys. 2 sets of twins in that. I had a twin brother, but unfortunately he died. And we all enjoyed coming back here after we'd grown up too. I spent 3 years in the army, and I used to come home as often as I could and get back to the river here. Once it's in your blood, it's always there, I think. And when I got out of the army, I started milking cows, which is something I never ever thought I'd do. I hated milking cows, and then it was a case of have to at the time, and grew to like the job. And I've been milking cows now since 1976 up until about 12 months ago, where I started driving trucks. So, yeah, most of my life's spent on dairy farms. Yeah, farming's certainly changed a hell of a lot in 30 years. All the small farms are just about gone. The average herd size now would be about 300 or 400 instead of 30 or 40 like it was back then. Trouble is, this year the price is back to where it was in 1980, back to 26 cents a litre. Yeah, I suppose I like my gardening. I've got a garden of 900 roses, and they keep me pretty busy for about 3 or 4 months of the year, and the rest of the year I just sit back and smell the roses. I also breed a lot of poultry. I show and judge poultry, mainly Old English game, and got a small dairy goat stud as well here. Just keep me in meat and milk, and we show them occasionally. So probably wouldn't spend $100 a month on groceries. We kill half a dozen goats a year and put them in the fridge, and we live on chook soup and roast chook for the rest of the year. Yeah. 1956, when it flooded here, was the worst flood they've ever had in this area. My parents used to have to leave their car 3k out the road there and walk out through the flood waters with us kids on their backs. And they lived off rabbits and fish for about nearly 18 months, I think. 2 years ago I contacted Parks about the lease on this place here, because there'd been nothing heard from Parks for about 20 years. And they claimed they didn't know that we were still here. And that went on for about 18 months, and then in March this year they gave me an eviction notice and gave me 3 years to get out of here, which we fought strenuously. And about a month ago I received a phone call from Parks Victoria, and they said that because of the national park they'd have to shift the boundaries of the national park to allow me to stay here. So hopefully that's going to proceed, and we'll be allowed to stay here for the rest of my life, and for whoever else wants to come here and do what I'm doing. Just enjoy the place that's been here. We've been here 150 years now, just about, and hopefully it'll go on. A good lifestyle, I like it. It's nice and quiet out here, no neighbours. Wouldn't go anywhere for quids.